The term Holocaust is often associated with the killing of 6 million Jews under Hitler's watch. The Holocaust itself was an evolutionary process. When we speak of concentration camps, most people immediately think of the killing camps of Auschwitz and others in Poland. However, as I stated earlier, this was an evolutionary process. The first concentration camp was built outside of Munich, and the camp was called Dachau. This concentration camp was generally for political dissenters, and it was created on March 23, 1933, after Hitler becomes chancellor. Not only Jews, but anyone that spoke out against the regime could be imprisoned in here for their political views. Jews have been part of all European countries. They were left over from the Jewish diaspora after the Romans destroyed the Second Temple in the 2nd century. So for over 1,500 years, Jews had emigrated to Europe, and they adhered to their religion, but also started to mix with other ethnicities and adopt other religions. For example, some Jews might marry Protestants, and then their children would be raised in a Protestant family. However, Hitler wanted to define what a Jew was. Their Jewishness had been defined by the German Nuremberg laws of 1935 as any person with one Jewish grandparent. Many Germans did not consider themselves Jews, but Hitler did. From 1933 until 1939, official German policy was to have them emigrate. By 1938, half of them did, about 80,000. However, the annexation of Austria in 1938 brought more. So there were very few Jews that actually did live in Germany. This was an emblem, the yellow Star of David, that identified Jews in Germany. Jews were forced to wear that on their apparel, and they were often treated as second-class citizens because of it. On November 9, 1938, before World War II would start in Europe, Kristallnacht occurred, or the Night of Broken Glass. Many Jewish-owned stores were looted and 200 synagogues destroyed in retaliation for a German diplomat killed in Paris. 1,000 Jews are murdered at concentration camps over the next month. When the German invasion of Poland occurred in 1939, they acquired 1.5 million Jews in their German sector. Remember, the Soviets were able to keep a third of eastern Poland. 3,000 of them had been killed in September of 1939. The German government decided to set up ghettos in urban areas to restrict them to poverty. 500,000 Jews were cordoned off in Warsaw, the capital of Poland, of which 2,000 died each month due to starvation. This is how they sectioned off Warsaw. The area behind it, they had lack of food, proper water and sanitation, so it was more or less to cordon off the Jews from the rest of the population. Finally, the Germans invaded the Soviet Union in 1941 and instituted the Einsatzgruppen. Within 6 months, 1 million Jews would be killed. In Kiev alone, 33,000 were killed in 3 days. Many times, Jews would be rounded up and taken to different ravines or to ditches, machine gunned, and then buried in these ditches. Here is just one of those scenes where, again, Jews were taken one by one and fired upon and put in the ditches, and then they would be buried. This policy would have long-term consequences. Many of these Einsatzgruppen would go mad and not have any dignity for life by all of this continuing killing. Also, the German army felt, could there be a more efficient way, because they are using a lot of bullets killing these Jews? That would lead to the idea for the so-called final solution to kill all the Jews in Europe. Adolf Eichmann was the head of the Race and Resettlement Office. He began the preparations for the final solution. In the summer of 1941, experiments made on Russian Jews on what would be the fastest and cheapest way to mass murder. Eichmann did not want any bystanders to witness it. He began death by gas vans or specially designed gas chambers. Ultimately, they decided to transport the Jews east by special resettlement trains. The Jews were led to believe that they were going to be resettled in Poland and work in factories to build machinery for the German army. However, when the Jews would disembark from these trains, women and children would be separated into one line and males into the other. They would be taken into a room and told to disrobe, get rid of all their valuables such as jewelry, and then go into a room where they were going to shower. These gas chambers were disguised with signs on them as the shower room. Zyklon B, which actually was made by the German company Bayer, if you're familiar with Bayer aspirin, Bayer made this Zyklon B. When they would go into these showers, gas would come out, they would die, and then their bodies would either be cremated or buried in big pits in the back of the concentration camps. Treblinka and Chlemno were used for native Poles. Auschwitz and Birkenau were used for Western European Jews transported east. This was also a major coal mining area, and some Jews were spared a bit to be forced labor in mines and factories. This is the famous gate of Auschwitz. The sign Arbeit macht frei means work makes freedom. The ploy was that these Jews were going to the concentration camp to work. Again, once they got to the camps, they were told to disrobe. Many of their clothing was separated in piles. This is the gas chamber that looked like a large shower room. That is Adolf Eichmann. To the left, this would be a pit in the back where they would bury these corpses from Auschwitz and the other concentration camps. And as I had mentioned, some of these bodies would be cremated, and these are the ovens from Auschwitz. Although Hitler exterminated 6 million Jews, 1/3 of the world's total, he did not kill the entire Jewish population. 7,000 prisoners were still alive, but very emaciated when the Soviets had occupied Auschwitz. And these images would be beamed around the world, and many people now learn the horrors of what Hitler was doing to the Jewish population of Europe. The best documentation of what life was like being a Jew in Nazi-occupied Europe was from the diary of Anne Frank. This is the sign on the Anne Frank house in Amsterdam, Netherlands. It is not their house. It was actually Anne Frank's father's place of business. He owned this business, and he had Christians working for them. These Christian families, in great danger to themselves, had purchased a second building aside of the Frank business, and they created a passageway to go from one building to another, so the Franks and another family could live in an apartment on a second and third floor. They had to keep quiet at all times in case anybody would hear them. The windows were blank, and Anne Frank would keep a diary of her happenings. You are not supposed to take pictures on the inside. However, I tried to smuggle a couple. This is the bookshelf down a little hallway, and behind this bookshelf would be the passageway. So once you would open this up, you can see how they would get through and deliver food to the Franks. D-Day had occurred, and many areas of France and Belgium and the Netherlands were being liberated. But in 1944, before the British and the Americans had gotten to Amsterdam, the Franks were discovered and they were deported to Auschwitz. Anne Frank's mother and sister died, and she believed that her father died as well. And just a few days before the Soviets would liberate Auschwitz, Anne Frank died at a very young age of loneliness because she thought that her father had passed away. Actually, her father was one of the prisoners that was still alive. So it's a very sad story. But what was found after the war were her diaries, and that would live on. It is important to note that Hitler didn't just target Jews. He also tried to round up gypsies and have them killed, as well as gay and lesbians. As a matter of fact, the symbol for the early gay and lesbian movement was the pink triangle, because Hitler would make them wear a pink triangle on their clothes, just as the yellow Star of David for German Jewish prisoners. Although Hitler exterminated 6 million Jews, one-third of the world total, he did not kill the entire Jewish population. In France, 83,000 were deported, but 200,000 were sheltered by French citizens. The Allies knew of the deportations by 1942, but did not know where or what was happening. The Allies did not find out until the summer of 1944, 2 years after the final solution began. Allies protested to some collaborationist governments. Hungary feared reprisals and stopped sending Jews. The King of Bulgaria simply refused to cooperate, and all 50,000 were saved. Mussolini did also, but once Hitler invaded northern Italy in 1943 and Hungary in 1944, forced deportation ensued. On January 27, 1945, Russia captures Auschwitz, and shortly thereafter Hitler commits suicide on April 30th, and Germany would finally surrender on May 8th, and the final solution would end.